we've got Donald Trump giving a rally speech of sorts at University of Alabama. Now, a commencement speech usually provides college students sort of a route to the life they should live. I'm bitter because I actually wrote a commencement speech when I graduated from the University of Rhode Island, because students could submit a commencement speech, and I was like, I've lived my college life to the fullest. I want to share a speech. It never got. They chose somebody else. I would have killed it with my commencement speech, but Trump right here uses his commencement speech. So if there's any colleges out there that want me to speak, I am here. I'm coming to you. Let's go. But Trump, breaking news, Dave gives a commencement speech. Because my commencement speech would be like, your degree doesn't matter. Go make a TikTok account and live your life. So Trump's speech, he kind of talks about, he plays the hits about himself. It's all about him. But here he talks about why, I guess, illegal immigrants shouldn't have due process. Have a listen to this.
Judges are interfering supposedly based on due process, but how can you give due process to people who came into our country illegally? They want to give them due process. I don't know.
And that gets a tepid applause from the University of Alabama. Well, I'll explain it to you. How you give due process to people who entered our country illegally is by reading the Constitution, specifically the 14th Amendment. What they say is, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. So you say, okay, but if they're not citizens, do they get rights? Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process or of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protections of the laws. What that means is any person is not a citizen. Any person is, are you on American soil? If so, you cannot be detained without having a proper access to a lawyer. If you don't have a lawyer, the government will provide you one. There are so many avenues to protect people from just being swept up. And, if you're here illegally, well, you go to the immigration judge and you state your case and they say, no, you got to go. Or you talk about, hey, I've got these work papers. I've been working here, and maybe you get an interview and you get put on the path to citizenship, right? We used to live, and when I say used to, like 2 months ago, 3 months ago, we used to live in a world where people said, no, look, if you're an immigrant, you need to do it the right way. You need to come through the avenues that I came through, that my forefathers came through, and whatever. But we need to get rid of those violent criminals. Then they changed it. And then they said, well, if you're here illegally, that means you're a criminal, so you have to go. So now they've moved the goalpost. And I don't think that's fair. And I don't think enough people are talking about how that, how disruptive that is to continue to change the rules. And part of what is difficult here is that our populace is, for the most part, very uneducated about the rights that we have, not just as citizens, but anyone in our country. So here's a clip where we've got an argument happening out where people are saying, no, they shouldn't receive due process, and they're being fact-checked live on air.
Because they're not citizens. We do not owe them the same thing. Okay. It has to mean something to be an American.
Batia, hold on a second. I get the passion, but I really think it's important to really scrutinize what you just said. The idea that people do not have the right to the processes of the law just because they are not citizens is your opinion, but that is not how the law works. You know that, right? The president has the right to deport people. Okay, answer my question. You understand that is not how the law works, that it is not true that just because your citizenship status does not mean that you do not get the same rights to legal process as everybody else in this country.
I think the country is... I think that the country... I'm answering your question. I am answering your very specific question.
Okay.
I think the country right now is very split. In fact, I just saw a poll yesterday from WIC, which was put out by 2A. The country is split almost 50-50 on this exact question. How much due process, how much of our investment and our money and our courts and our time do we owe people who committed a felony as their first act on U.S. soil?
The question is all of the bandwidth of the judicial system. And if the judicial system cannot hold up due process, you need to hire more judges. You need to build the system, right? You don't rip down democracy because it can't handle the bandwidth right now. And I guess that proves my point that the country's 50-50 on this issue. The country should be 100% on the issue of protecting due process. You always hear Republicans talk about, you can't have my guns, Second Amendment rights. How about 14th Amendment? We just discussed what it was. Everybody who argues for the Second Amendment should be just as steadfast in arguing for the 14th, which is saying, I will fight for the right for my neighbors, whether they're legal or illegal, to have proper representation in our court system, and then we can figure out the truths that way. All right, big story here. Kate Max is a running influencer. She always asks questions like, want to go take a run with me? And then she has these conversations. Well, she did one with Caroline Leavitt, and it blew up in her face. And she deleted it, and then she reposted it, and then she deleted it again, and then she reposted it again. She's getting love and hate for this. The running community is not too happy. Here's just the intro clip.
Hey, how many miles are you running today?
No miles because we're at the beautiful White House, but why don't I give you a tour?
Let's do it.
So then Kate Mack gets her balls washed, metaphorically speaking, as she gets a tour of the White House. And you might say, Dave, what's the problem with a tour of the White House? Well, it really comes down to what I've been saying all along, which is this isn't your grandmother's White House. This isn't, well, I'm on this side versus that side. It's the White House that is disobeying Supreme Court rulings. It's the White House that is rounding up people and getting them out of the country as quickly as they can before a judge tells them to turn the planes around. And, the Rush Hour podcast is all about sharing trending news, and this story is enormous as people are calling out the influencers saying, hey, by all means, you can use your platform for whatever the heck you want, but you are being duped. Here's one person's response.
So you're telling me with all the privilege and all the platform that you have, it never crossed your little tiny mind to say, I interview people while running. Maybe I should interview an immigrant who has had to run for their lives. Maybe I should interview a person of color who's had to fight for their life. Instead, you said, no. With this privilege and with this platform, I think I'm going to go to the White House and interview that demon woman, KK Caroline.
Now you might say, well, is she really a demon woman? Well, I'll just say this. Obviously, the press secretary, they try to bend and they try to spin the news in the direction to make their boss look as good as possible. That's obvious. What I don't like is that she'll hide behind her Christianity. She'll hide behind like good moral values as a young mother while just spouting out bold-faced lies. Take, for instance, this one where she tries to weaponize the judicial system and complain about a judge when she's immediately fact-checked.
And this Judge Boasberg, is a Democrat activist. He was appointed by Barack Obama. His wife has donated more than $10,000 to Democrats, and he has consistently shown his disdain for this president and his policies, and it's unacceptable.
You're right where I wanted to go about the idea that these people are all foreign terrorists, but Judge Boasberg was originally appointed by George W. Bush and then elevated by Barack Obama. I just feel like I should clear that up.
So, I mean, she seems pretty smart. Like she knows what she's doing, right? And she's complicit in that. And I think that's a real problem when people can't live in the reality we live in. Like not everybody has Trump derangement syndrome because they just think he's a bad guy. It's because they know they're getting their leg pissed on and being told it's raining. And people don't want to, they don't want that. And it's not, these political activists that are all progressive. A lot of the judges that are standing up to Trump right now were Trump-appointed judges, including, here are some thoughts from someone who worked in the first Trump administration.
I want to weigh in on the Kate Max drama just because I'm someone who worked in the first Trump White House and ended up resigning and have spent the last 4 years now being a very outspoken critic of his, trying to undo some of the damage that I helped cause. So seeing her platform Trump's top spokesperson on her TikTok and podcast is really frustrating. Now, I'm someone who grew up conservative. I've worked in Republican politics almost my whole career. And I used to get really frustrated not seeing Republican politicians or conservative voices represented in things like social media or pop culture or fluffy magazine interviews. And I get that Kate is saying, look, I'm giving voice to both sides. I was at the Biden White House. I interviewed Tim Walz. Now I'm doing the same for Trump's administration. But the thing is that this is not a normal Republican administration. This White House is actively taking away people's rights and pushing us toward authoritarianism. So you don't get to say, oh, well, I'm just being fair to both sides. I don't know Kate's background, if she's a trained journalist, but I just feel like you shouldn't put these types of people in these settings where she isn't going to push back on their lies or their bullshit that they're spewing. I don't know, content creators can use their platform how they see fit, but I just don't think we should be normalizing or humanizing these people.
Yeah, and what it comes down to is this. Where's the conversation about all of the promises? They said they would cut Doge checks. That's not going to happen. They say they were going to have tax cuts to the middle class or even tax the wealthy. They're certainly not doing that. They were going to audit the Pentagon. Well, the Pentagon's about to get $1 trillion budget. Where does all of this money come from? Will they be cutting Medicaid? Will they be cutting healthcare programs for the poor and for the elderly? Will they be gutting Social Security? We already know they're getting rid of Social Security offices and telling people they can no longer get phone calls, so then they have to go in person, but then there's nowhere to go. So are they just making the system work so poorly that then they can claim, look, it's broken, we need to get rid of it? And these are questions people have. So Trump continues to lie and say, yeah, gas prices are down and it's, they're, this and that and groceries and that's not the truth. The truth is that store shelves are about to go bare because there's no imports coming in from a ridiculous tariff war, a war that we haven't even seen the real results of yet. This is like sort of a ticking time bomb happening right now, as I believe the stock market and people have their blinders on and they're saying, you know what, let's just deal with it as it comes. So for so long, Trump made all of these crazy claims and he didn't act on all of them. And people just said, oh, that's Trump being Trump. And now we have prison systems in El Salvador. Now we've got people, getting deported and laws coming around, amendments, right, signed through by the Congress that are saying it's okay for ICE to deport U.S. citizens. So at what point do we say, oh, he's still playing? And at what point do we lose the fabric of democracy? What side do people want to be on?